know, there's nothing that puts me more in the Christmas spirit than the Metal Gear series. The Metal Gear series is probably one of Konami's biggest claims to fame when it comes to their video game franchises, beloved by many as the de facto stealth game, and one of the most definitive in its genre with its complex plot, colourful cast of characters, and the ability to simultaneously skirt the line between an emotional rollercoaster and a goofy-ass series of events. But not too often will you ever hear fans talk about the origins of the Metal Gear series, beginning with the two MSX-developed games, Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Beginning development in 1986 by a little-known game developer who had trouble fitting in at his company, after his game The Lost World was cancelled by Konami, his fellow game developers kept up his spirits by telling him to complete at least one game before he died. The Misfit developer was later given another game plan by Konami which was centered around the theme of war, and due to the hardware limitations of the MSX being unable to handle a high-intense action game, the Misfit developer instead opted to base the game around avoiding the enemy rather than outright confrontation, with his primary inspiration for this game being the film The Great Escape blended together in a pastiche of 80s action movie cliches. From all of this had spawned the iconic stealth series that we all know today as Intruder. But do you want to know what the funny thing is? Before the Misfit developer created Intruder, he was actually going to leave Konami and opt out of the games industry entirely. Though the development of Intruder was often strained, the Misfit developer was convinced to stay on to the project thanks to the advice of his fellow teammates, and of course this project would eventually become Metal Gear. So yes, the Misfit developer, known to us mere mortals as Hideo Kojima, owes his entire career to the encouraging words of his fellow game developer, because if it wasn't for that, the Metal Gear series as we know it would not have been a thing. But then again, that's just one of the many reasons why I don't buy into the whole cult of personality Kojima's got going for him right now. But that's a story for another time, and one thing I'm going to list off before we get into this is a few housekeeping rules for this review. Number one, and I know people are gonna do this, I'm not gonna spend the entire review doing the whole fuck Konami thing, because at this point, the whole joke/anger has really kind of run its course, and ultimately what we're here to do today is just have fun and review video games, not get into video game politics. Number 2, save for a few certain points, I won't be taking any future developed Metal Gear games/prequels into account for the plot summaries of these reviews. These games were made at a time when nanomachines, the Patriots, the Boss's Will, the vocal parasites, or any of that shit was even a thing, so don't give me a 50-page essay on why Decoy Octopus is quiet, because I do not care, and neither does Kojima apparently, considering how callously he retcons the series. And number 3, and I know people aren't going to shut the fuck up about this, yes, I am going to address a certain plot element at the end of the game, but I'll get to that after I'm done with the story segment. And lastly, with number 4, I'm sticking to the version on the Metal Gear Solid HD collection rather than the original MSX game because, shock horror, I don't have an MSX computer. And so with that out of the way, on July 13th, 1987, Metal Gear was unleashed upon the world, and so too began the legacy of the Metal Gear series. So our plot kicks off in 1995, where the United States government received intelligence about a weapon of mass destruction being created in the military fortress known as Outer Heaven, located in South Africa. The US then called upon their Special Forces unit known as Foxhound, an elite Black Ops unit commanded by the legendary soldier known as Big Boss, to infiltrate the enemy fortress and discover the weapon that Outer Heaven was creating. What came of this was Operation Intrude N312, a stealth mission that was carried out by one of Foxhound's top agents known as Grey Fox. After infiltrating Outer Heaven, Grey Fox was shortly captured by the enemy, with his last transmission to the US being simply the words, Metal Gear. A few days later, Big Boss retaliated to this by sending in rookie Foxhound agent Solid Snake to infiltrate the enemy fortress in Operation Intrude N313. Armed with a transceiver radio and some cigarettes, Snake was ordered to infiltrate Outer Heaven, find Grey Fox, and destroy the final weapon, Metal Gear. And with that, our overall goal is a simple one. However, unlike most video games at the time where they would just leave the plot at that, Metal Gear has a little bit more meat to its story outside of Solid Snake beats the bad guys. With Big Boss as our mission commander, he is the primary member of our support group over the transceiver, and he gives us hints and clues as to how to survive in Outer Heaven. Although, he sure does seem to forget a lot in his old age. This is Big Boss. I forgot to tell you that you're gonna need the gas mask for the gas room. However, in doing so, Big Boss tells Snake to contact Kyle Schneider, the leader of the Outer Heaven resistance movement, and the guy who knows Outer Heaven better than anyone. I mean, after all, he was the architect. And for the sake of adding a little bit more flavour to the story segment of this review, I'm also going to be expanding upon the background, specifics, world, and characters of the original Metal Gear game, because honestly, for as knowledgeable as people are about things in Metal Gear Solid and beyond, I think the original games on the MSX still have a lot of stuff that need to be showcased, alongside the lore with the Solid series and how it ties into that, because, again, we have a lot of Metal Gear fans who only started with Solid and don't bother with the MSX game because I don't know, for some reason they find them inferior. So, yeah, allow me to fill you in on the knowledge of the Metal Gear series. Anyway, Kyle Schneider was forced to work on Outer Heaven by its mysterious leader, and soon joined the Outer Heaven resistance movement after his wife and child died in a crossfire as innocent victims of the conflict. With Schneider's knowledge of the Outer Heaven schematics and his natural leadership instincts, he rose as the leader of the Outer Heaven resistance movement, and as such, he was the perfect choice to help out the rookie Solid Snake on his mission. With Schneider's help, Snake navigates his way across Outer Heaven, finding and freeing hostages throughout the base, some of them even letting slip about a member of Foxhound who was held captive in the base, but was still alive regardless. Alongside Schneider, Snake also makes contact with Diane, another member of the Outer Heaven resistance movement, who imparts her knowledge about Outer Heaven's Elite Four mercenaries, and informs Snake about the best way to defeat them. I call them the Elite Four because, well, aside from having very English-sounding names, they are the game's bosses, making her essential for your first playthrough if you're not very accustomed to playing games of the 8-bit era. As Snake continues to rescue the hostages, he soon learns that Grey Fox is being held in a secret cell in the basement, and that the only way he's gonna get to him is if he gets captured himself. As soon as Snake's captured, Big Boss contacts Snake again, telling him to check the walls. Which is basically code words for bullshit archaic design, but I'll get to that in the gameplay segment. After breaking through the wall, with his bare fists I might add, Snake finds Grey Fox, and Grey Fox begins to explain what he learned prior to his capture. Grey Fox explains that Metal Gear is an all-terrain nuclear-equipped walking battle tank capable of launching a nuclear strike anywhere on the planet. Normally, somebody would argue that Metal Gear would probably not be a very efficient weapon on the actual battlefield, but hey, I'm not the kind of person who always has to bring real-world science into fictional video games. Thankfully for Foxhound, however, Metal Gear is not yet complete, and Snake still has a chance of stopping it before it's too late. Grey Fox tells Snake to find Dr. Drago Petrovich Madnar, the captive scientist who created Metal Gear for the mysterious leader of Outer Heaven. We'll get to Dr. Madnar a little bit later, but especially in Metal Gear 2, his character arc is actually a very interesting one. After Snake busts his way out of prison, he encounters one of the Elite Four mercenaries of Outer Heaven called the Shopmaker. Yes, you heard that right, the Shopmaker. You know, for as wacky as his name sounds, I really wanted to see this guy in Metal Gear Solid 5, if only for the sake of having his name being mentioned on screen. Shopmaker was a former Spetsnaz during the time of the Soviet Union, and because of his training, he was proficient in the use of his riot gun. After the fall of the Soviet Union, he was offered a place in Outer Heaven by its mysterious leader, who had him stationed as not only the prison warden, but also as the only guard stationed in the area. Yeah, fuck Revolver Ocelot, man. I mean, where's the love for Shopmaker? In fact, you know what? I want a Metal Gear sub-fandom dedicated to Shopmaker. I mean, this guy's so badass he can stop any prison riots as a one-man army. Anyway, with Snake unarmed and Shopmaker being the badass he is, Snake runs away and recovers his gear before defeating Shopmaker, and then he makes his way out of prison on the hunt for Dr. Madnar. While making his way across the base, Snake comes across more hostages, and they reveal that Dr. Madnar is being held in the courtyard. But before Snake can do anything about that, he runs into another one of the Elite Four mercs of Outer Heaven named Machine Gun Kid. Machine Gun Kid was a former member of the SAS, a British Special Forces unit who held significant talent with his mastery over the use of machine guns, hence his name. Machine Gun Kid soon left the SAS and became a mercenary for hire, currently under the contract to work for Outer Heaven by its mysterious leader. After defeating Machine Gun Kid, Snake eventually learns that to reach the courtyard, he'll have to parachute off the roof. While traversing across the roof, Snake encounters a High-D helicopter which Snake effortlessly takes out with a few shots from the grenade launcher. And somewhere out there in the world, Liquid Snake is crying. After landing in the courtyard, Dr. Madnar is nowhere to be seen, which is revealed later on to be that Dr. Madnar was transferred from the courtyard to Building 2, which is 10 kilometers north. Upon traveling to the desert, Snake is pitted against a tank guarding Building 2. Snake defeats the tank that's guarding Building 2, but then he encounters the worst fucking boss in the game, but more on that later. And then Snake eventually finds Dr. Madnar in the basement of Building 2. Or maybe he wasn't even Dr. Madnar at all. As it turns out, the Dr. Madnar scene here is an imposter, and the real one is being held on the second floor. And if that wasn't bad enough, Snake also has to do battle with Fire Trooper. Fire Trooper was initially a member of the counter-terrorism unit GSG-9, and specialized in the use of his flamethrower, a weapon that he could use just as easily as a soldier could use a rifle. Much like Machine Gun Kid, Fire Trooper was a mercenary for hire, with his latest contract being with the mysterious Outer Heaven leader. Traveling back to level 2, Snake locates the real Dr. Madnar, who reveals that his daughter Ellen Madnar is being held hostage in the basement of Building 1, and that if Snake doesn't rescue her, then he's not going to say anything about Metal Gear. Of course, it would never be a Metal Gear game without needless backtracking. Snake eventually finds Ellen and frees her, where she explains that she was being used as leverage against her father to force him to create Metal Gear. So after traveling out of Building 1, through the desert, back through the heavily guarded Building 2, and onto the second floor again, Snake returns to Dr. Madnar, who goes into greater detail on how to stop Metal Gear. He explains that Metal Gear, or the TX-55 Metal Gear to be more exact, is located on Building 3, 20 kilometers north and 100 floors down. Dr. Madnar then goes on to say that the structural weak point of the TX-55 is to attach plastic explosives to its legs, in sequential order, but I'll get to that in the gameplay segment. Before Snake heads off, Dr. Madnar informs Snake that the Level 7 security card is in possession of the Bloody Brads, a set of 2 TX-11 cyberoids which he created with an AI designed for combat, and a near impenetrable skin resistant to bullets. And believe me, this won't be the last time that Dr. Madnar does anything involving cyborgs. It's with this that Snake then comes into the final member of our support team named Jennifer. Jennifer, much like Snake, managed to infiltrate Outer Heaven by posing as a medic and is searching for her older brother who was taken hostage by one of Outer Heaven's Elite Four mercenaries. In a nutshell, Jennifer is by far the most useful of Snake's support group as she acts as his gadget girl alongside providing him with access to specific areas that can't be unlocked by keycards. And on top of that, she even gives him a rocket launcher designed to take down the Bloody Brads. And of course, seeing as we have a member of our support group who's actually useful, Jennifer never appears in a Metal Gear game ever again. And no, Snake's Revenge or that one cameo in Metal Gear Solid 2 Snake Tales doesn't count. Anyway, thanks to Jennifer's help, Snake obtains the rocket launcher and kills the Bloody Brads, giving him the level 7 card, which, after crossing another long stretch of desert infested with poisonous scorpions, this is where things begin to get a little weird. Once Snake arrives at Building 3, Big Boss starts sending him strange messages, words of advice that either lead him into danger or send him far away from Building 3. As Snake continues into the trap-laden fortress, he finds an oxygen tank which allows him to enter the latter sections of Building 2, as the rest of the rooms in Building 3 require a higher level security card. More backtracking. Wonderful. Making his way through the underwater sections of Building 2, Snake gets a call from Schneider, who tells Snake that he knows who the boss of Outer Heaven is. Shocked at the discovery of who the leader is, before Schneider can reveal who the mysterious leader of Outer Heaven is, his transmission is cut off. Schneider, respond! Schneider? He can't be dead. He was my broseph. All the times he spent helping me out, navigating out of heaven, telling me where to find shit, I can't believe he's gone. Anyway, after Schneider's impactful death, we're then introduced to the last of the Outer Heaven Elite Four mercenaries, Dirty Duck, who in my headcanon is the leader of the Elite Four of Outer Heaven by his awesome name alone. I'm serious, man. Metal Gear 1 had some of the coolest characters in the series. In fact, you know what? I am an advocate of Dirty Duck, and I think he should be a little bit more appreciated for reasons that I'm going to go into now. Dirty Duck was the former leader of the extreme terrorist group known as Eggplant, and given his skill in the use of boomerangs, he was contracted by the Schneider-killing bastard and leader of Outer Heaven. Yeah, unlike the rest of the Elite Four of Outer Heaven, Dirty Duck uses fucking boomerangs as his main weapon of choice.
No one laughs at a master of Quack-Fu!
This guy, man. This fucking guy is my second favorite character in the entire Metal Gear series, save one. But we'll get to him in Metal Gear Solid 2, but for the time being, let's just appreciate the grand mastery of Dirty Duck. Anyway, back to the game's story. Dirty Duck, as it turns out, has Jennifer's brother hostage, and I mean no hyperbole when I say this, but if he dies, you are fucked when it comes to endgame. And I say this with the utmost urgency on your first playthrough, because the survival of Jennifer's brother is the very difference between life and death. After Snake defeats Dirty Duck, Jennifer's brother tells you the most essential advice to your survival, which is to take the ladder on the left. With Card 8 in Snake's possession, Snake makes his way back to Building 3, and here's where things begin to get even more screwy as Big Boss continues to contact Snake telling him to abort the mission. Hell, he even goes as far as to telling me to turn off my PlayStation 3? Ah! The Patriot! As Snake pushes on through the traps and defenses laid out before him, he finally reaches the TX-55 Metal Gear. Following Dr. Madnar's instructions, Snake manages to plant the plastic explosives on the feet of the TX-55 in the sequence provided by the good doctor, and eventually Snake manages to defeat the TX-55 before it could activate. Suddenly, however, the self-destruct sequence of Outer Heaven has been activated, and now Snake has a time limit to get the hell out of Dodge. But upon trying to make his escape, Solid Snake makes a shocking discovery. Solid Snake, I've been expecting you. I am the Supreme Commander of the Foxhound Unit, and the leader of the Fortress Outer Heaven, Big Boss. Yep, the big twist of Metal Gear is that your commanding officer was actually the final boss of the game. Not a bad twist for a game made in an era where stopping Dr. Eggman was pretty much the extent of video game storytelling, and honestly, it even has a nice bit of foreshadowing in Big Boss's name. I mean, come on, his name is Big Boss after all. Big Boss goes on to say that he gave this mission to you because he was attempting to fool the rest of the world using false information, coupled with the fact that Big Boss was certain that a bumbling rookie like Solid Snake couldn't possibly get as far as he did. But because Solid Snake is just that badass, he managed to thwart Big Boss's plans with the TX-55 Metal Gear, and as such, Big Boss adopts the mindset of, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. And thus, our final battle between the legendary soldier and rookie begins. However, during the battle, Diane calls up Snake and briefly touches upon a few romantic feelings towards Snake, but ultimately we know nothing will come of it because we never see Diane again. Snake eventually manages to defeat Big Boss using Jennifer's advice of using cigarettes in combination with a rocket launcher, and thus, Snake kills Big Boss and then makes his escape. With Snake finding himself in a room with 3 ladders, he recalls Jennifer's brother's advice and takes the ladder on the left and climbs to safety, just barely managing to avoid the destruction of Outer Heaven. And so, Snake informs Foxhound that the TX-55 Metal Gear has been destroyed, and that he's returning home with a local radio station reporting upon the destruction of Outer Heaven. After the credits finish rolling, the player is treated to another transmission from Big Boss, who reveals that he's actually still alive and that someday, he and Snake will settle the score after the destruction of Outer Heaven. And so, that's the story of the first Metal Gear game. Overall, the plot of Metal Gear 1 is a pretty simplistic one compared to later games in the series, nothing too complex, but one that I felt I should go into a little bit greater detail on because I feel that this game deserves a lot more exposure than Metal Gear fans tend to give it. I mean, I know most people usually start with Metal Gear Solid as their first entry in the series, but even despite this game's age, I do think that they should check this game out because the story told about Outer Heaven, especially those who have come into the fold with Metal Gear Solid 5, should really take a look at this one since, well, it's pretty much the direct sequel after Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain. And I know I probably made the story segment sound a little bit more in-depth because of my expansion upon the support team, the Elite Four Mercenaries of Outer Heaven, and the promotion of pretty awesome characters like Dirty Duck, Jennifer, and Shotmaker. But much like with my Silent Hill and Assassin's Creed review, I wanted to fully show how much I love the games in the Metal Gear series, because despite how much I love Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 for getting me fully invested in the series, I am genuinely saddened that none of the characters from Metal Gear 1 ever get as much recognition as some of the more well-known characters from the Solid series like Revolver Ocelot or Psycho Mantis. And if there was anything that I hope to achieve with this review, it's that I can get people interested in the story of this game for as archaic as it might be to some. Well, that and also getting Dirty Duck a cult following because Dirty Duck is fucking awesome. And so that concludes the story segment of this review, so I believe it is time for us to... Oh, excuse me a second. You know you're gonna have to talk about it eventually. Oh man, do I have to? Especially considering... Not happy about that? Get over it. No, there is one last thing to talk about, and involves a certain... Snake. And as such, I'm gonna play this here to warn you that this next segment will involve spoilers to Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, so here's your forewarning, skip to... I don't know, a timestamp that I'll probably place in the description somewhere, so... Yeah, here's your warning. For those of you who have been in a coma for 9 years, it was actually revealed that the big boss we fight at the end of Metal Gear 1 isn't actually the big boss who was our commanding officer, but instead Big Boss's body double, Venom Snake, set to rule in his stead while Big Boss is off leading Foxhound and training Solid Snake. The reason why I lamented to mention this earlier is mostly because this is a retcon added by Kojima, but to me, this honestly feels like a Shadow the Hedgehog scenario in the fact that it tries to be the answer to a question no one asked. I mean, to use an example from Shadow the Hedgehog, we learn that Shadow was created by Black Doom's blood, which is a shocking revelation and twist, but ultimately, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because there was already a plausible explanation for how Shadow was created beforehand, so all it really comes off as is unnecessary information that we didn't really need to know. And to me, Metal Gear Solid 5 feels very much in the same way in the sense that, yes, I know who Venom Snake is and I know that he's a thing, but the question I ask is, what does it really add to the overall story in the context of Metal Gear 1? To put it bluntly, in Metal Gear Solid 5, the context of Venom Snake being Big Boss's Phantom is that you, the player, are Big Boss. Everything that you thought Big Boss did in the Phantom Pain was actually done by you. And the twist of Venom Snake being the final boss in Metal Gear 1 doesn't really amount to anything because it really just adds nothing to the overall story. Only further confusing things is the transceiver radio message at the end saying that he will be back. So, what, are we supposed to assume that Venom Snake is still alive? I mean, is this supposed to be the real Big Boss who's escaped Foxhound? Were the transmissions at the end of the game Venom's attempt to escape death by the hands of his leader? And this just raises too many questions because if Venom Snake is alive, then what happened to him? Where was he during the later games? Not only that, but according to Metal Gear 2, Big Boss apparently survived Outer Heaven through the use of cybernetics, so wouldn't it make more sense for Venom Snake to head Zanzibar land instead of Outer Heaven? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense! But to cut a long story short and to summarise my thoughts on Venom Snake in relation to Metal Gear 1, I will say only this. The final boss of Metal Gear 1 is Big Boss. The way you interpret this is up to you. Onto the gameplay side of things, you can move Solid Snake using the D-pad or analog stick and punch using the X and circle buttons. One of the strange things about the original Metal Gear in terms of how the game functions is that, though your main objective is usually to avoid detection, the enemy's field of vision is kind of questionable. What I mean by this is that in order for the enemy to see you, you need to be directly within their pathway. Otherwise, even if you're just a little bit off center, you can typically just move right by them despite being within close proximity. It's an odd programming quirk, but it's one that I think you'll adapt to rather quickly, assuming you can give it some leeway considering the period this game came out and the other games that were around at the time. Throughout the game, Snake can pick up weapons and items to help him out on the journey, which can be used by pressing the square button. The weapons in this game are your typical military weapons such as the pistol, grenade launcher, submachine gun, mines, an RC rocket launcher, and of course the regular rocket launcher. The pistol, grenade launcher, rocket launcher, and submachine gun work as you'd expect them to, although when firing the submachine gun you're unable to move for some reason. However, the RC missile works a little bit more like a 2D version of the Nikita missiles from Metal Gear Solid, as you can guide the missile from a top-down perspective and navigate it towards your destination, which in the case of Metal Gear, is usually to destroy switches or take out the bosses such as Shotmaker or Fire Trooper. Whereas things like plastic explosives and mines, Snake usually places them on the spot where he is, which is essential for taking out bosses such as the tank and the TX-55 Metal Gear. With a transceiver radio, you can access it by pressing the select button and pressing down to access your support team members as you unlock their frequencies. Big Boss you have right from the start, and as for Diane and Jennifer, those are unlocked by freeing hostages dotted around Outer Heaven. However, as for Schneider's frequency, to my knowledge, the game never tells you. I mean, Big Boss does tell you that Schneider can be accessed via the transceiver, but he never does give you the frequency, and unless of course you're willing to screw around with a dial to get the right number, this is where some of Metal Gear 1's archaic design begins to seep in. I mean, maybe it's a similar case to Metal Gear Solid where you're told to check the back of the CD case for Meryl's codec number, but in regards to the HD collection, which I'll get into a little bit later as it has an updated localization, I really think that they really should have had Big Boss say something akin to, "This is Big Boss. I forgot to tell you that Schneider's frequency is 120.79. And as I alluded to in the story segment, for the first time player going at Metal Gear without a guide to help them, Schneider and Jennifer are going to be your best friends in this game, because without Schneider, he's pretty much going to be the only person who tells you where you need to go in order to get essential items. I mean, there is a reason why I consider this dude my brosif, which makes it all the more paper that he died! And Jennifer, purely by virtue of how she's the only support member aside from Schneider who, though not appearing in the flesh, is actually out there putting her neck on the line to give Snake the rocket launcher and allow him access to specific parts of Outer Heaven. And need I say any more about her brother being essential to your escape after defeating Big Boss? As far as inventory is concerned, by pressing the L2 or R2 buttons, Snake can access its inventory and use the X button to access things like rations to regain health, or use whatever items are necessary for that current situation. As far as overall control is concerned, the game works fine enough for a game of its time, and if you're a first time player keeping this in mind, then after a small adjustment period, I'm confident that you'll be able to get on board with what Metal Gear has to offer. In terms of mission structure, your objectives are based upon the events in the story, however for those unfamiliar with 8-bit games of this era, it might take a little bit more of your attention span considering the way in which you might need to go won't be immediately clear to some new players. Not to say that I think gamers of modern times have short attention spans, but unlike later games where you could just call Colonel Campbell or Otacon for advice on where to go if you get lost, Metal Gear doesn't really do that. Whenever you're called up by your support team, it's either that or by plot progression that you'll know where to go, otherwise it's pretty much up to you to find the right path by yourself. Granted, Schneider does help a lot in this regard as he can direct you to essential items necessary to continue on, But other than that, I feel that this is where Metal Gear is going to suffer in terms of being a game that somebody who was just introduced with the series with the Phantom Pain might struggle with if they go without a guide. And unfortunately, this isn't the only time when the game's archaic design rears its ugly head. To use a small example of this before I get into the meat and bones of this little tangent, one of my biggest gripes with this game, first time playing, was the use of walls which you have to punch through or blow up with plastic explosives in order to locate essential items. It's a small annoyance and one that is common for a lot of games of this era, but nevertheless, it really fucking grates on me because, you know, rookies who have no idea where the fuck to go unless they have a guide to tell them where things are, it can lead to them getting so easily lost. For example, one of your other mission objectives outside of stopping the TX-55 is to rescue the hostages, which are of course tied to your star ranking. Your star ranking determines how much health and ammo you can have, also when you can access Jennifer's frequency once you've attained all 4 stars. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem for me, but here's the thing. You need to make sure that the hostages do not die. Otherwise, what happens is that the moment a stray bullet hits a hostage, your ranking is decreased by a star, and then you have to save another 3 or 4 hostages to get it back, and worst yet, the hostages don't respawn, leaving you fucked if you want the extra health and ammo. Not only that, but one of the reasons why Dirty Doc's boss fight can be so difficult on the first time player is because if Jennifer's brother dies, you will not only lose out on the knowledge of which ladder to take in the destruction of Outer Heaven when you escape, but you'll also never find out that cigarettes are a key part of the big boss fight. Which to me is a little bit harsh, I mean, especially for rookies just getting their feet wet, because they could be easily screwed over by momentary clumsiness, and it's a kind of difficulty that I don't think can be excused as, oh yeah, it's actual good game challenge, which 30-something millennial gamers like to suck their cocks over. As far as bosses are concerned, I feel the first time player should have no real trouble with them, as most of the time Diane will usually give you the best method of dispersing your foes, but there is one boss that I think can go fuck itself. The Bulldozer. I'm serious, a fucking bulldozer is a bigger threat in this game than the TX-55 Metal Gear, or Big Boss apparently as later games will go into great detail on. For one thing, the slightest touch of it will instantly kill you because touch damage is something that I just fucking hate in video games. Secondly, the method of killing it requires the use of the grenade launcher, which, by and large of how it arcs its shots, usually means that the bulldozer has time to get an inch closer to Snake. And lastly, this fucking thing moves at a pace which requires you to be fucking on point with your attacks, otherwise if you're just 1 nanosecond too late, you're as good as dead. And it's the kind of boss design that fucking shits me because not only how strict the timing is, and I wouldn't mind if there was some kind of learning pattern to show gamers where they went wrong so they can correct themselves next time, but honestly, it's a very much a do or die situation that can really fuck you up. But aside from that, there's no other instance that I can really think of this game doing that because it's really just a one-off annoyance, so that's just my little warning for anybody who's interested in playing the first Metal Gear game. Overall, the gameplay does show its age in places, and for all its faults and archaic design as far as newcomers are concerned, I think they'll be able to adjust given some time, and honestly, when you really do get into the swing of things, Metal Gear can actually end up being a pretty entertaining adventure. As far as the technical aspects are concerned, graphically speaking, Metal Gear looks pretty decent for an 8-bit game in terms of its set pieces, with my favourite being the TX-55 Metal Gear, which despite being immobile during its boss fight, I still think looks really fucking cool. Sprites on the other hand look a little too samey, but outside of Big Boss who looks a little bit too dissimilar to the basic enemy soldier, I think you can easily tell apart Snake from the other major characters in this game. In terms of the soundtrack, Metal Gear is quite limited in terms of the music you hear. I mean, I can practically count the amount of times I heard the theme of Tara playing in the background. But that being said, the tracks in my mind are actually pretty memorable, with a particular mention going to the theme of the TX-55 Metal Gear. Seriously man, this is some catchy stuff. While the music loops are short and maybe a tad repetitive to some, I do very much enjoy the soundtrack of the original Metal Gear, and a lot of its tracks do actually make a return in later games via the VR missions, namely the theme of Tara and the Game Over music in the Metal Gear Solid VR missions. One last thing to mention is that the version I'm playing on the Metal Gear Solid HD collection via Snake Eater was given a new translation which to a small degree made the game's dialogue a little bit less awkward this time around. For those of you wondering what I mean, just listen here to what Solid Snake says when contacting people via the transceiver in the original version of Metal Gear on the MSX. "This is Solid Snake. Your reply please." You know, if Metal Gear ever ends up getting remade, or if I ever meet David Hayter, I would love to hear him say that in a Solid Snake voice. This also included a few changes in names for certain copyright reasons, as the Bloody Brads were originally called Arnold, in reference to the Terminator series, as well as renaming some of the bosses. But outside of those small changes, the game is still more or less the same Metal Gear that you would have played back in 1987. All in all, Metal Gear's technical aspects, though not exactly reinventing the wheel, are still pretty strong nearly 30 years later, and as subsequent games would later improve upon, they would only get better as the games rolled on. And so, what are my final thoughts on Metal Gear? For a first installment in the Metal Gear franchise, it certainly does have its problems, as most first games often do, and coupled with a few of the game's archaic trappings, I honestly don't blame people who might find this game to be a little bit too ancient for their tastes. However, I don't think there should be any reason for gamers of modern times to be deterred from playing this game. The story, despite being a tad simpler, is still more involving than most beat-the-bad-guy games you're treated to for this era of gaming, and the twist of your commanding officer being the final boss of the game, I think actually makes for a pretty good twist for the first-time player. Couple that with some catchy music and the origins of all-stars like Big Boss, Grey Fox and Solid Snake, or even some underrated characters like Jennifer, Shotmaker and Dirty Duck. And honestly, I think Metal Gear packs a lot of cool stuff despite its age. In terms of recommendations, if you're a Metal Gear veteran who's played the Solid series more times than they can count, then I'd say it's about time you go back and see what went down in Outer Heaven to witness the rise that turned Solid Snake from a bumbling rookie into the cynical soldier that he would later become. And as for newcomers, while I can see some being hesitant or worse, outright refusing to play this game on the account of its archaic design, I do think that if you stick with Metal Gear and adjust to its style of play while heeding the advice of characters like Diane, Schneider and Jennifer, your experience should be a pretty decent one in terms of experiencing Solid Snake's first mission. And so on that note, I am Skully, keep it new metal. And now, it's time for this nightmare to end once and for all. Beyond this door will either hold the answers I seek, or more questions left to be answered. Well, here goes nothing.
music can